In this video, I want to explore the topic of reincarnation versus one and done. So basically, two different paradigms of possibilities of human existence in terms of the immortal soul. Does the soul reincarnate multiple times, as is the model in Hinduism and Buddhism and many other religions? Or is the Christian hypothesis of one and done, uh, you know, more correct? And so basically, what I want to do is I want to explore the plausibility of both of these sort of paradigms, look at sort of the argument and counter argument, and also look at things like the justice of both models, in terms of either cosmic justice or divine justice, and ultimately have sort of a dialectic between these two different models of the immortal soul. So both models would acknowledge the immortality of the soul. The one fundamental difference is that the Hindu, Buddhist, Eastern philosophy model would look at the soul as coming back to a human body again and again and again, or even the possibility of, of basically jumping from human to animal to various biological life in a recurring cycle. And so kind of the notion is that according to the reincarnation model in Hinduism and Buddhism, is that the soul would just continue to reincarnate until it achieves a state of moksha, as is taught in Hinduism, like unity with the gods, basically, or God, Krishna, Brahma. And in Buddhism, it's the same notion of reincarnation until you become an enlightened being, bodhisattva or a Buddha, and you no longer have to be reborn as a human being in the physical world. Versus the Christian model of one and done, and a one life shot and a final judgment, and eternity in either one of two places, either hell or heaven for eternity. So in both models, there's the notion of the immortality of the soul. However, there's a fundamental difference in terms of, whether that's cyclical or whether that's a permanent. You've been created one time and that's it. And now your soul is going to continue on, but not in the physical world. It's going to continue on in a spiritual state, which has to do with judgment and, a final state of the soul as determined by one life in the world. So let's kind of look at the plausibility of these models. There has been some study on reincarnation. Probably the most prominent in terms of Western scholarship is by Dr. Ian Stevenson of the University of Virginia, who studied reincarnation extensively for many decades at the University of Virginia. And he actually traveled all over the world, and he, did research with children, young children. Basically, the idea was that certain children are able to remember a past life up until the age of 6 or 8. And, so he would basically interview the children and then, get their story in terms of they're saying, well, I was, from such and such village, or I was married to such and such, or these aren't my real parents. My real parents are in some other town. And so a lot of times it would be like the children would have like a longing for another lifetime. He would also look at autopsies and death records. So if the child had a birthmark, he would basically try to link that to the death report and an autopsy of someone who died in the town where the child said that their previous incarnation was from. And he'd try to, if the person died of a gunshot wound, Dr. Stevenson would basically say, well, the person has a birthmark in the same place roughly as, the cause of death, and that the cause of death was transferred to their next incarnation, and that's where birthmarks come from. So that in a nutshell is the work of Dr. Stevenson. And so he went to not just countries where reincarnation is a common belief. He also studied people in Europe and America as well, and he used the similar type of methods in his research. A counter argument to that would be the work of biochemist from the University of Cambridge, Rupert Sheldrake, a biochemist of the University of Cambridge, studied the concept of morphic resonance. And so Dr. Sheldrake basically talks about morphogenesis and morphic resonance, and also in terms of biological fields and organizing fields. So, for example, monarch butterflies have a similar body and brain structure. And so as monarch butterflies are making their migration from Canada to Mexico, new butterflies are born along the way, because you're talking thousands of miles. And so if a monarch butterfly is born somewhere on the trail, how does that butterfly know exactly where it is along the migratory trail? And so in terms of biological life, animal life, the kind of herd mentality, fish swimming in schools, birds traveling and migrating together, is that the idea is that there's these morphic biological fields that influence biological life and could give sort of biological organisms an impression or a knowing of where they ought to be, and sort of a downloading of information through these biological fields. So there's other examples, for example, the violin or a string instrument. You'll notice that if you hold a violin in your hand and someone else starts to play a violin, your violin will start to vibrate, because the sound peg inside your violin and the properties of your violin are similar to someone else's violin, such that when one of those instruments starts to vibrate, the other instrument will start to just vibrate on its own as a result of sound vibrational frequencies coming from one instrument. So the idea, and now this is kind of my own crude analogy of morphic resonance, but basically similar things emit frequencies and fields, and that information is transferred in those fields. So a child that claims to be reincarnated may be picking up on a field from another human who lived in the past, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that person is a reincarnation. And so again, you're talking about the spirit, and you're talking about frequencies. If you look at your cell phone, it's getting frequencies from the cell tower that are unseen. And so in the digital framework and the electromagnetic framework, you have one iPhone is on the cloud, and another iPhone is also communicating with the same cloud, and both of them are getting downloads from information from the cloud, and the cloud is the intermediary between those iPhones. And you can transfer files to your friends through the cloud, or you can transfer files directly through smartphones through the electromagnetic field that connects these phones together. So just as electronic devices can share information through electromagnetic fields, the same thing probably applies to biological organisms. So again, a lot of times if you go to a place, many people have been to like a Holocaust, a concentration camp, they can feel something that's there. That doesn't mean that they were actually, lived there in a past life. It just means they're picking up on some of that energy that's coming out of that place. And I'd say anecdotally, I've experienced similar things. Like every time I've been to Hiroshima, where the atomic bomb was dropped, I feel queasy and sick. And then I go and look and see at the museum what was happening to people. People were out there, skin was melting off, things like that. I mean, it was absolutely horrific. All I know is I've been to Hiroshima a few times, and every time I go, I just feel queasy and nauseous. That doesn't mean I was actually living there in a past life. It just means, I'm picking up on something that's there. Anecdotally, also, I visited a town recently in England, near Wales, which is called Chester, and the Romans occupied that particular city for a really long time. And there's Roman walls that still go around the city, and there's a pit where the gladiators used to fight. And the city has seen a lot of carnage over hundreds of years, not just the Romans in Roman times, but also in the English Civil War. There was a lot of fierce battles in that area, a lot of public executions, people getting beheaded. And I told my girlfriend when I was there that I felt like the energy was so thick, I feel like I could cut the air with a knife. And she actually said, she went to college there. She said, her parents that aren't even from the UK, they came to visit her, and they said this exact same thing when they went there, that they just thought it was so heavy, like this ominous sort of feeling. So again, that doesn't, when you visit these kind of places that have like an intensive history, that doesn't mean that you necessarily you lived there in a past life. It just means there's a field, there's a biological field that you can tap into. Something from the past remains, but that doesn't necessarily validate reincarnation. So even though someone can pick up information from the past, doesn't mean that they were actually reincarnated from the past. And another example of a reincarnation study is Om Seti, a British Egyptologist. Her given name was Dorothy Eady, and then later in life she started calling herself Om Seti. Very famous, probably one of the best Egyptologists, if not the best Egyptologist ever. And as a girl, she visited the Egyptian Museum in London and immediately started to feel things, and eventually becomes an Egyptologist, and she's able to find exactly where certain temples are. She tells the archaeological people where to dig and how to find certain things that are buried. And so she had this intuitive knowledge of where things were in Egypt. She had knowledge of the temples and things like that, that she started picking up for the first time when she was a child in a museum in London, ancient Egypt museum in London. So again, her brain and her self could have been receptive to that information, but that doesn't necessarily mean that she was an Egyptian priestess in a past life, as she thought, but it may not be. There are other examples as well. So in the spiritual realm, there could actually be demons that are communicating information to people. So, sometimes people could be getting down, according to the Christian hypothesis, people could be getting downloads from demons. The demons are giving them information, that maybe the person may feel useful, but that's serving maybe a demonic agenda. Okay. And so in the Bible, in the Old Testament, in Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 10 through 12, it's said that, stay away from any sort of divination or spiritual mediums or any sort of thing in that realm where you're tapping into what they call familiar spirits. So you want to stay away from that, because that's basically demons that are just trying to lead people astray. So in the Christian tradition, there's the notion that, you can be getting downloads of information from the spiritual realm, but that's not necessarily a good thing. And you probably want to stay away from that. Getting into the notion of sort of the justice of reincarnation. So those who believe in reincarnation may say, well, one life is not enough time to get it right, and that you'd have to come back over and over and over again to sort of get things right. And it wouldn't be fair to just have one life. You need a bunch of lives. Well, you could take that to the other side as well and say, if reincarnation is true, then, how do you ever sort of recover from karmic debt? Say you stabbed someone in this life. Well, in the next life, someone is going to have to stab you to pay that karma back. And then, that person's going to need to be stabbed. So there's an infinite regression of violence in the past and an infinite succession of violence in the future. And that for every negative action, there just becomes more and more negative actions that have to sort of, continue to repay those karmic debts. And it just kind of never ending. It's like a spider web that just keeps getting more and more complicated. Okay. And so and so the other thing you could have with reincarnation is like sort of a caste system where basically if someone's born in poverty, you'd say, well, you deserve that because you were a bad person in a previous life. Therefore, like in the Hindu caste system, you kind of deserve that because, you don't have the karma, or, you didn't develop enough karma to be born in a better situation. And in Buddhism, you kind of see that continued, like in Tibet, where the lower echelon Tibetans live in absolute abject poverty. And then the lamas are doing kind of well. And the notion is, basically they've recreated the Hindu caste system all over again, where, okay, all these people that are less fortunate than me are there because they don't have enough karma points to get to a higher level. So the idea is that, maybe someday, in a future incarnation, you might be a lama at some point, and then you might, graduate and become a Buddha or whatever. I would say, again, that's kind of like a paradigm of exceedingly low expectations, because what you have in those cultures is you have justification for the subjugation of people who are handicapped or poor or living in sort of unfortunate circumstances, and there's really no upward mobility or upward growth because they have a very fixed mindset paradigm. And so what you'll notice is that the vast majority of scientific knowledge is actually coming from Christian civilizations that don't believe in reincarnation, because they're the ones, innovating and, creating new ideas and improving people's lives, because they're not shackled to this mindset of karma and retribution and cycles and having to pay things back. They're just completely liberated from that false ideology. And so they're able to just live in the now and make the most of the life that they have, and not be shackled to sort of a self-defeating mindset that just feels like you constantly have to be paying karma back for a past life and all that. So you basically get a clean slate in the Christian model. You get a clean slate so you don't have to deal with all this ridiculous baggage of feeling that if you were born poor, that's because you don't have enough good karma. It's like you don't have to deal with that. You just move on and you just make the most out of your current life that you're in. Also, too, with karma, the idea is that we're all just kind of gradually becoming enlightened together as a civilization, but that's not necessarily the case, because it's not really clear that people are getting better. Like you could make the argument that people are getting worse, and that with all these incarnations, we're not improving at all. So, for example, if you read the ancient Greek classics like Plato's Republic or Thucydides' Peloponnesian War or Aristotle's Metaphysics, you'll see that the ancient Greeks, their level of sophistication of thinking was far beyond modern people. I mean, you look at the dialectic debates they had in Plato's Republic, or any of these, even in Thucydides, where you have like diplomacy and very complex diplomatic letters being written back and forth, arguments and counter arguments. It's really hard to find anything even close in terms of rhetoric and complexity in modern society. Modern people are thinking in very little, tiny little sound bites and very highly simplistic arguments, and social media and sort of like monkey mind. But I mean, you go back to the ancient classics and you'll see a much more sophisticated level of thinking. And this is like a few thousand years ago in ancient Greece. In ancient times, people had this very, very, very sophisticated thought process. So, the reality is that if you think about it, that a person in ancient Greece was a human fundamentally with the same rational mind that we have today. And that if the Christian model is true and everyone is a human, then everyone gets the same shot. everyone gets the same exact, the human condition hasn't changed in a couple thousand years. Maybe people are dumber because of social media and smartphones, but fundamentally the human nature has not changed. It hasn't necessarily evolved. It hasn't, you could make the argument that it's actually devolved, but you could make the argument that we're essentially people are people. And that, it's not like we're all moving to enlightenment together or anything like that. It's that, you have like civilizations rising and falling. And when civilizations adopt proper philosophical models which seek the highest good, like basically Aristotle would call the educated Athenian, and you have a nobility of character that seeks the highest truth, you're going to have civilizations that really take off. And when you have people, in a mob mentality, in a highly kind of dumbed down mentality, you see the decline of civilizations. And so Rome had an up and a down. Ancient Athens had an up and down. So basically, it's not as simple just to say we're all reincarnating and therefore we're all getting better. The Christian model is that you are a human, and that you have the same choices to choose good or evil, virtue or vice, just as an ancient Athenian had the same choice that you have today. And so that gets to the Christian model of the justice of the one and done, is that you've been made in the image of God, and you have been given life. You've been given the gift of life, and you can decide to choose the highest virtue and the highest truth, or you can choose to engage in low-level things and debauchery and immorality and evil. And so that's a fundamental choice universally that everyone has equally. Okay, so that's kind of the other argument. That's the Christian argument. So again, the Christian argument is that it says in Hebrews 9:27, it is appointed unto man once to die, and then the judgment. So basically, the Christian model is that you get one shot. You've got, and it's not just one shot. In the course of a person's life, they have every moment of every day, 365 days a year. So if they're dying as a 50-year-old or 60-year-old, they've had countless moments and countless minutes and countless, numerous moments and numerous minutes to make decisions, to get things right, to align themselves with the highest truth, with God or not. And that, the injustice of reincarnation is that you'd have to go through countless lifetimes being raped and going to war and having all these horrible things happen to you again and again and again. Whereas in the Christian model, you only have to deal with suffering in one life. And then after you die, you'll be judged and basically, allowed to go to heaven or go to hell to pay for your sins. So in summary, reincarnation versus one and done. I've kind of gone through, and again, I've only touched the very surface level of both sides of the argument. I think you could make arguments. You could pick a side. You could say, well, based on the evidence for reincarnation, I'm going to believe in that. Or you could say, well, based on the Bible and based on Revelation and based on, the idea of that you're made in God's image, and you basically have one shot to get it right. And that, it's like a caterpillar and a butterfly, is that, you're only a caterpillar once and then you become a butterfly, and that's it. You're done. There's no more coming back and back and back as a caterpillar. And that the Christian model is fundamentally that, this is the caterpillar phase in this world, and then you become a butterfly and you never return to the caterpillar. It's a one-way ticket. The other thing I would say about reincarnation is, reincarnation isn't always, we try to think of reincarnation always in terms of romantic, like I was, Alexander the Great in a past life, or I was Cleopatra or something like that. But, you don't want to think that you were a cockroach or an amoeba or a monkey, and then the other thing is that, do you really, when you look at a dog or a cat, do you really think, oh, well, that was a human that just messed up in its past life and now they're a dog or a cat? You've got many NDEs, near-death experiences, where people actually meet their pet dog or cat in heaven. So, that implies a intentional God that created a cat to be a cat and a dog to be a dog and a human to be a human. And that we're not in these different realms where you can just, bounce back and forth between animal and human. That there's a intelligent God behind all of this that intentionally designs things to be as they are. So you don't switch from like being a snake to being a dog to being a human and going back to being a snake. That is a very sort of chaotic universe model where you got ping pong balls just bouncing around in all different directions. But the Christian model is that there's an intelligent God running the show and intentionally doing things for a reason, and making humans to be humans for a reason, and making dogs and cats to be dogs and cats for a reason. And that would comport with the Christian notion of heaven, where someone sees their dog or their cat in heaven because God has allowed them to be in heaven with a dog or a cat that was their pet. So again, it's not, but the reincarnation model is that you can jump back and forth from animal to human, and it's kind of random based on just ping pong balls bouncing around and karmic actions that create a cause and effect. It's just an infinite cycle of causes and effects that are just bouncing around all the time. And you're kind of just stuck in this quagmire, who knows, for maybe thousands or millions of lifetimes. Well, personally, I like to think that there's an intelligent God that created this system and designed it with a logical plan in place, and that God created me to be me. He put his fingerprint on me. He created me in his image. He created you in his image. And he has a plan for you as you in heaven, as you. Not, you're going to be an animal and bounce around. That, you will be you. And you in a spiritual form will be you for all of eternity. And you'll continue to grow as you are you. But you're not going to be bouncing around between being a blade of grass and an amoeba and a snake and a spider and a cockroach, and just kind of, bouncing around. So again, I've kind of glossed over it, but again, those are kind of the arguments for reincarnation, for and against reincarnation, and one and done. I'm looking forward to your thoughts and opinions on this topic. And please like and please subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.